And I just did it. I said, well, creative muses, if you're out there, I'd love to receive my next idea. And I'm not kidding you, within literally 5 minutes of lying there, I started to download an idea, and I told my writing partner, and he's usually quite fussy with what ideas he likes of mine.
What's the difference between the writer's goals and needs and the character's goals and needs?
Good question. It feels like there's a lot of answers to this, and it has a lot of depth to it. I think one of the things in this exercise is that when you sit here and you're the character, one of the reasons I ask, like, what is your goal? What are your needs? As a character, it might surprise you as the writer what the character's goals and needs are. That's the thing. As a writer, it's a little bit like we were saying about controlling the character and where they go and what they do. We have a goal as a writer to like entertain an audience and to communicate things, but the characters actually sometimes have very different goals to what we want them to have. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but I have something else I can discuss, but it's linked to this, but it's slightly different. Maybe I should, unless you have something you want to add.
I'd like to add, I would like to just say that first of all, that's a great question, because that, I think, ultimately is one of the most difficult marriages to pull off, where you have, the parallel between the story, the overarching story, the beats, the rhythm, and then all the different characters and their wants and needs and how they're all interwoven together. And that's where you can have fun with dramatic irony, where the audience knows something the character doesn't. And what are those characters doing while these characters are, just about to die? Why is there no one to rescue them? And then who comes to rescue them? But what were they doing when they weren't here? It can get quite complicated. And especially, in my case, I'm in a third act of the same story that I was embodying the character of. And I have a lot of characters and a lot of moving parts, but the most important thing for me is that the story hits certain beats, and then trying to still give the protagonist that few final big moments, but all the other characters' loose ends need to be tied up. How one does that, I think sometimes it's literally just playing checkers and moving around different things. Could it be the dad? Could it be no? I think it should be the mother. Yes, the mother, because then when they go into the kitchen, the sister and the mother can fight with pots and pans and knives, and yes, and they can talk about how the daughter never wanted to learn cooking, and that's why she doesn't know what a mandolin is, as a weapon, and it that's kind of flies. But you need to, I think, be quite flexible and not be too married to the character's needs, and first see what serves the story in terms of what the beats require, and then I think like reverse engineer it. At least that's how I do it, and see which characters could have what motivations that would sing with that. And it can be, especially when it comes to action, it can be quite
It's
challenging.
like herding cats, basically. You got all these cats, and they've all got these goals, and these, and they want to go, I want you to go here, and they're like,
Yes, exactly.
So I think that's and actually, it's interesting, this question. It's a very deep question. Actually, I have a chapter in my book called Character's Goal versus the Writer's Goals and Needs. I think I speak about it a little bit, but there is something about, even at a very basic level, especially with dialogue, actually, which we haven't spoken about that much, but dialogue is really interesting, because here is the thing. As a writer, when I'm writing a scene, I need to communicate that this character loves this character. So what I do, I go, I love you. And then they say, I love you. But the character's like, no way am I going to tell that person I love them. I like them too much. I'm not going to tell them I love them. I'm going to, like, if this is, say, for example, the first romance, and the woman who wrote Mudbound and directed Mudbound talks about this. She calls it the triple bumper theory. It's kind of an interesting notion, and I'll talk about it here as well briefly, which is that a character always wants to protect themselves in a way, and they're not going to, say for example, if the scene she uses is somebody is just meeting someone and they really like them. Now, as a writer, I'm starting a scene. I've got two characters in high school. I need to tell the audience that this character likes this character, right? That's my need. Because if I don't do that, then the next scene, when they do something to impress her, we won't understand why they're doing it. So I must tell the audience that this character likes this. So I just go, character X says, I like you. But an actor in that moment will go, I wouldn't say that. It's embarrassing. I'm at a high school. I'm going to tell someone that. I'm going to say something else. Like I'm going to say, so, I like your sweater. or, I missed you in gym the other day. Right? Small little things. And the triple bump theory is they're protecting themselves. They're not saying I like you. It's the subtext. The subtext is I like you. But a character would just say, nice sweater. That means I like you. And so that's where the character's needs in the scene, within a scene, not the overarching need but their need to protect themselves. And they still also want to tell the person they love them, but they're not going to do it like you, the writer, want them to. And this is where I see a lot of people actually writing very on-the-nose dialogue because their need is to move the story forward. And so they make characters do things they wouldn't do. And it's a little bit like instead of moving them around and character motivation is motivation to say things as well. Like, what are you going to really say? Are you really going to say that? No, I'm not going to say it. And you, as an actor, you get the lines, you're like, I wouldn't say that. Why would I say that? That's crazy. So that's also where that's a slightly different thing because it's got to do with dialogue, but it's linked to your question.
And I want to say, I think when your character's motivation meets the needs of the script beautifully. For example, the character who was always selfish throughout his life has an amazing save the cat moment right towards the end, and the audience goes, "Oh, that is golden cinema. That is when you know you're doing something right." And sometimes you do lay so much pipe, so to say, to create a certain concept of a character that they won't do this or that, and then when they do something that surprises the audience but is still in alignment with who they are, at least how much they've grown, the audience gets such a kick out of that.
Yeah.
So many examples, like in horror movies, like in Barbarian, where she, despite nearly dying several times, goes back into the house and goes and tries to rescue the guy. And I won't say how that ends for her, but that is when it is quite exciting and satisfying when those things align and you know that it's going to hit on not just a physical and a pace level, but an emotional level as well.
What happens when you know that the character's dialogue is something that they would not say? I mean, you were sitting there and I saw a character that was unsure and maybe even didn't want to speak. And what if there was a direction from a writer from a director where they wanted you to say something and in that moment that character would be silent?
Absolutely.
So much can be said without dialogue, though, and I think maybe that's also the thing, which I think sometimes as writers we forget the power of silences and looks and things. Now, you can't just have your characters like glancing at each other in a screenplay because sometimes it's not very clear, but the unsaid is so powerful, and actors know this actually, and actors have this incredible ability to also pause before they say the line. They understand the power of the pause and they understand the power of the unsaid. So you can hold the space when somebody says, for example, in that scene with the jumper, like, oh, nice jumper. Now we're waiting because someone has said something. Now the other character is going to go, thanks. But that moment of pause, right? My face did something, I don't even know what it was. But as an actor, there's a real power there. And I think for writers to understand the power of silence and the gaps in their script is really important.
Yeah, and showing, obviously, not telling. I think the things that ultimately come into play that you should constantly keep in mind when writing dialogue is all the different factors, like the power dynamic. Who in the scene feels more confident and more empowered? Who has the biggest desire? How are they educated? How that influence what they say? What kind of references are they using? What movies or books are they referring to? Their type of humor. And that can be quite hard to sustain throughout a story, but I think that is critical to establish the type of the humor, the cadence, that's more of a vocalized thing, but basically the speech rhythm, the kind of dialogue, and then how the character would interact with other characters in different circumstances, and sustaining that is the trick, because it's sometimes easy to get going with something and then, I've sometimes been flawed where I'm in a situation where I think, well, I thought I knew this character, but gosh, how would they respond? And but then I think it's also okay to sometimes almost like meditate on it, like sleep on it, daydream, go for walks.
Absolutely.
And sometimes you just don't have the answer. And it comes to you eventually, because I liked how Matthew said, it's like they almost embody a type of energy themselves. And if you stay with them, in fact, I have a slightly woo-woo story related to writing. I wrote my first screenplay, and about a year later, I reread it, realized it wasn't that great. It was school fees that I was happy to pay, part of my experience. And it took me pretty much the day to realize that I'm shelving that. I probably won't send it for more critique from anyone, but that I was ready to now receive my idea for my next story. And I thought, well, I'll start by writing down maybe 5 or 10 series or movies that I really like. Because what is my taste? What is my sort of, my genre, my thing? And I'm not kidding you, I was lying in bed that night and I thought, well, if there are such a thing as creative muses, I would like, or multiple muses, I would like to evoke them and ask if I could receive an idea. And I just did it. I said, well, creative muses, if you're out there, I'd love to receive my next idea. And I'm not kidding you, within literally 5 minutes of lying there, I started to download an idea, and I told my writing partner, and he's usually quite fussy with what ideas he likes of mine, and he instantly said, yes, I like it. And literally we'd call each other every 5 minutes and say, and then this and this and that, and go, yes, and this and that. And that's when you know that a story has a life of its own. And I think in that way, characters also, in a strange way, I know Elizabeth Gilbert has written about, the big, what's it called? I can't remember now. Anyway, she wrote a book about how creativity is like a river, and that if you don't basically, or like a stream of air, if you don't scoop it up, then it will move on to the next person. And I think in some ways the characters are similar. So you just have to live with them for a bit.
Yeah. It kind of links back to this whole idea of catching the big fish, just like being open and meditating and live with it and not stress about it. And I love this idea of invoking the muses and the intention. We're talking about intentionality and just going, okay, I think we can get in our own way very often, and invoking a muse or externalizing something a bit and realizing that there's a bigger purpose and a bigger thing out there can be very useful, actually.
Yeah, and like we said before, they, what can be quite a smudgy painting becomes more and more clear the more time you spend with them. With every draft, you learn a little bit more about the characters, and it's really fun time to live in that world with your characters. And that's what I've come to discover and love so much about writing, is it's my little world, and only the people who know about my story are privy to that. And sometimes I just want to talk about my world with someone and they don't have a clue what I'm talking about. But it's such a lovely privilege.
Last but not least, quirks and tics and body language. Ooh, there was a character I love to watch. I think it was Robin Wright, and she was anxious, but she would do this thing with her hands. She would it was almost like cracking the knuckles, but not quite. And that showed that she was in a place of not feeling comfortable and that she was anxious. And I thought, wow, what a great, that said so much about the character.
A character that just came to mind to me is Gary Oldman in Slow Horses, another amazing series if you haven't watched it. And he is just the most foul, offensive human in his physical releases, shall I say. Out of nowhere you'll just hear a loud fart or a burp or something, and I'm not sure how much of that was written. I'd actually be very curious to know how much. I imagine it was, since it was, I think, based on a book. But I just loved it. I loved the fact that he was so unashamedly
and
himself.
I think part of this thing about when you sit in the character chair, I didn't actually ask you about this, but I do normally do this. I say are there any things that you're feeling in your body that you feel that you want to do, and that becomes down to these tics or farts or whatever it is that somebody does. You can actually discover that when you embody the character, and I think some of these things are definitely discovered in the production as well. Where an actor will embody a character, and then because You know, it's one thing writing in a story like Frank, 21, neurotic. Okay, but how do you show neurotic? And then that's up to the actor to show. But I do think if writers know when they've written that word, that occasionally he'll do something that'll indicate it. It's the show don't tell thing, right? It's like, what are you doing that shows us that?
Yeah, it could be, you know, like an old injury that makes them walk a certain way. Exactly. You know, so I think there are ways to give clues without specifically directing. Yeah. Although, you know, sometimes it's very tempting to do. But to kind of lay the foundation so that the actors and the director can get enough to work with. Yeah. And they, you know, they do appreciate it.
Yeah.
And then they can add to the creative process.
Exactly.
So
exactly, it's a communication between you, the writer, and the team. And if you can inspire them to discover things that you didn't even know necessarily, but you've sent them in the right path, and they go off in that path that you have sent them on with your words on the page, you never know what they're going to discover, and it could be great.
Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. Here is a complimentary question from our book Story Questions.